Hi everybody! We're learning how to do these Facebook Live posts out here at the Barberville Pioneer Settlement. You know, it takes a while for technology to catch up when you're in the late 1800s and early 1900s all the time. So anyway, here we are at the Lewis Log Cabin, and I'm gonna turn this camera around so you can see some of the wonderful things that are going on here. So we have some folks that are here ready to teach some wonderful history today. Say hi to Joanna.
Good morning and welcome to the Lewis Cabin. We want to thank you guys for joining us here today, whether we're teachers or parents or students. We've got a little history that we can share with you. The settlement may be closed, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to have interaction. So we're staying our 6 feet apart from each other the way that we should, since we don't have our masks on right now. But we are trying to maintain our connection with you today. So today we're going to talk about the Lewis Cabin. This cabin was built up in Willacoochee, Georgia in 1875. Now, when we first came upon the cabin, it looked a little bit like this. It had been unused since 1968, and in 1992, Lorna Jean Hagstrom, who is the great-granddaughter of James Lewis, donated this cabin to us. And so we went up and we took the cabin apart. We numbered each and every piece. As Deborah comes up carefully up the steps here, you can see on the door here there's a number 7, and that was one of the numbers that they had put on the different pieces as they took it apart, brought it back down here like a Lego set and put it back together. Now, James Lewis, when he was 22 years old, he had been doing quite a bit of logging and had saved up a good bit of money and was able to buy about 100 acres of land just on the outskirts of Willacoochee, Georgia. He cut down every one of these white pine logs. He put them together in what is called a saddle notch construction, where he cuts out a notch and then lays a full log in it with a notch in between. What's interesting about the construction of this building is that if you had been up north or you were out west, the chinking, the material you would have put between the logs, would have been clay or mud of some sort. But in our very humid climate down here, it would be nearly impossible to have that stay here. It would just ooze right on out. So James used cedar planking, a nice hard board here instead. And that did two things for him. Not only did it help to prevent the weather and wind and bugs and everything to come in, but that cedar planking really helped keep the bugs out, which was an added benefit there. When James originally built the house, there were no glass windows in it. This would have just been an opening with a shutter across it. As he became more wealthy, he was able to buy glass and be able to put windows in the cabin itself. Well, come on in. Let's come on in and take a look and see what the cabin looks like. As you come in, you'll notice it is essentially a one-room cabin. Now, this cabin, if you can come on up here, Deborah, you can see the picture up here. This is James right here in the middle. That's James, and this little tiny thing here is Mary. Now, Mary had 12 children, 11 of them right here in this cabin. The one over here on the right, this is Maud. She was the only one that was actually born in a hospital. So they had 14 people living in this one room. Now, it was interesting, James was really tall, and when you look at the door frames, you'll see that they're quite low, and he used to hit his head all the time on the doors, which I thought was kind of funny that he didn't make the doors high enough. But as you can see in the cabin, they would have had very small amount of space. They wouldn't have had a lot of belongings. But what they did have in here was they had the loft, which is up above here. You can see the ladder over here, where the kids would probably sleep up there at night. mainly because, especially in the winter, when the heat rises from your fireplace, as we know in science, heat rises, it will go up to the top up there, and it would have kept the children quite warm. During the summertime, the children would have slept out on the porches, would have been where they would have tended to sleep. James and Mary would have slept in a bed very much like this one. And it's interesting, have you ever heard the saying, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite? Now that saying comes from something that was reality at the time. So back then we didn't have box springs underneath the mattresses. Instead, you had rope that was tied across from the post going in between. So that rope, if you had anyone putting any weight on it, as you can see up here on this string, if I put weight on this, it's going to sag. And you don't really want to sleep in a saggy bed. So instead, you want to pull it tight. So you want to sleep tight. You want the ropes on your bed to be nice and tight. Where the bed bugs come from is that the mattresses were made with cotton ticking and stuffed with just anything that they could devise. And a lot of times it was cotton if they had it, but more likely it was straw or hay or even Spanish moss. And if you are at all familiar with Spanish moss, there is a little critter in there that loves to live in Spanish moss, which is called a chigger. And if you get a chigger bite where they bore in and it's itchy and you really don't want that. So the term bed bugs came from the fact that you wanted to make sure your mattresses were bug free. And so sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. That was one of the fun sayings that actually has quite a bit of history. The other things that we do have in the cabin here would have been, this is where they would have washed up in the morning. If you can imagine, Dad probably was able to wash first, and then that 12th child was the last one to wash in that same water. So it wasn't necessarily always clean. When we were talking about birthing, an interesting artifact that the settlement has is this chair right here. This is a birthing chair. So little tiny Mary would have sat in this chair 11 times to be able to have her children right here in this cabin. I think I understand why she wanted to go to the hospital for that 12th one when Maud was born. Now originally this cabin, this door was not here. This we put in as access because we wanted to show this other room. When the Lewises were living here, this was the space that they lived in. Now, more than likely, they never had more than about 9 children at home, but I want you to think about the fact that this small one room had 12 to 14 people in it at any one time. You think you have cabin fever now having to stay home. It was cabin fever big time back then.
So what did they do when they had to use the bathroom?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So they would have had, at night especially, you did not want to go out into the wilds of Florida at that time. Think about it. You've got Black Panther out there. You've got bears. You've got alligator. And at night, snakes galore. You're not really going to want to walk outside, especially at night. So they had what were called chamber pots. And chamber pots now, they would go in this, and then it was the children's responsibility to empty it in the morning. And it did not matter if it was number 1 or if it was number 2. Woo, you had to go out. Usually it was the youngest child's duty as soon as they could carry the pot to go out and wash it out. Now interesting, now we're having this whole discussion about toilet paper. Well, if you do run out of toilet paper, you can go back to the way that the pioneers took care of that issue. They might have used leaves. Corn cobs were actually quite popular. I'm not quite sure about that one. They have all kinds of seashells in some way, and I can't figure out how they would have. Well, maybe it was scooping. No. I don't know, but we won't go there.
No seashells.
But anyways, yes, because there was no bathroom. We only had the one room. Now come on in here. We have this room. This room is set up as a kitchen. At the time when James and Mary lived here, this would have actually been their storeroom. That door would not have existed. This door would not have existed. Instead, they would have only had in here their farm implements, their rakes, their hoes, whatever they needed to be able to work the land. Up top in the loft area over here, they would have stored their foodstuffs in barrels, barrels of flour or molasses or oats if they could get them. And so that area would have been used for that. We have this set up so you can see what a kitchen would have looked like back in the late 1800s. Now this cabin is 145 years old. We would have, at that point in time, they would not have had kitchens attached to the house. Traditionally, kitchens were separate from the house, because if your kitchen burned down because you're working over a wood stove or over an open hearth fire, fires were very common at that time. And so they would have the kitchens separate from the house so that if it burnt down, their house wouldn't go down at the same time, because fires were quite common. But you can see a lot of the different things here that might have been used by the pioneers, everything from our flat hot irons. You got to have a good bit of strength to be able to lift these guys up. You'd heat them up on your stove using a pot holder to pick them up, and then you would use them to iron your clothes. We have our kettles, we have different kinds of churns, we have different grains and things that we may have collected over the time. But one of the things that we do here at the cabin with the children is we teach them how to make butter. And I think out here we have Miss Rhonda, and
Hi.
she can tell you about making butter.
Yeah, so back in the day, they would have had cows on their farm. They would have taken a bucket out and milked the cow, put the milk in here. But you have to let the milk set. So the milk goes to the bottom, the cream rises to the top. And then you take the cream off and put it in the butter churn, like this. Then, this thing, it would have been children who would have done this as well. It goes up and down and all around, really making muscles. Then when you finish churning and it turns into butter, then you need to put it in a crock, which is simply a big bowl that is very heavy. So it keeps cold in and keeps hot in. And so they would have taken their butter with their paddles and taken it out and put it in the crock. From there, they needed to keep their butter cool. But the trouble is, in Florida, it's very, very warm. And they didn't have ice back then, or refrigerators, or ice makers, or anything like that. And so they used what we call a spring box. They would put their butter in the crock in a spring box. They would put it in a lake or a stream or whatever water source they had, and it would flow through one side and out the other, keeping the butter cool until they wanted to use it. And that's how they made their butter back in the day.
Thank you, Rhonda. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
So, Joanna, you want to wrap it up?
Yes,
I think we've got off to a rough start, but I think we covered.
We recovered. Yeah, you know, James and Mary Lewis. James, when he started out, he did not know who his father was. He would say he was a bastard without any, qualm about saying so. But he became a very wealthy man. He was able to, at the time of his children were getting older, he was able to give each child 100 acres worth of land. And so he was a very wealthy, prosperous man. And like we said, this house was occupied until 1968. And we want to really thank the Hagstrom family, especially Lorna Jean, for donating this cabin to us and giving us the opportunity to be able to share its history with all of our patrons. If you guys have any questions about the Lewis cabin, please put them in the comments. We'll be more than happy to answer them for you. And have a lovely day, and I hope you stay safe and healthy during this quarantine.
Thank you, Joanna. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You want to wave goodbye? Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe.
So y'all stay safe and be well, and we're looking forward to when we get to open up again. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day.